As Isaiah's timeline for the last days continues, we learn more about the branch mentioned in verse 1. This branch is the messenger, the Lord's servant. He's also the ensign spoken of later in this chapter. He's the one appointed to gather Israel from the four corners of the earth and bring them to Zion. As the prophet, he will hold all the keys of the kingdom to establish Zion and lead the ransomed of God into the millennium. In verses 2 through 5, Isaiah speaks of 16 gifts and powers that this man will have. Everything from the Spirit of the Lord resting upon him to his ability to slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. He'll have the gift of discernment, or the ability to judge as God would judge, and to do so with quick understanding. And he'll have the power to smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, as Enoch did. Verse 5 tells us that righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. Anciently, kings and generals wore a sash or girdle about their waist as an emblem of their authority. So Isaiah is telling us that this man's authority will be signified by his righteousness and faith. And his faith will be so great that he will literally lead God's children into the millennium. At that time, as we now see in verses 6 through 9, all enmity will cease in Zion. These verses about the wolf dwelling with the lamb and a child playing with poisonous snakes almost seem to come out of nowhere. But in fact, they are the natural outcome of this servant leading God's people to greater righteousness, faith, and holiness. According to Joseph Smith, this man will lead the people to become perfect, notwithstanding their previous blindness. In verse 10, Isaiah calls this man a root of Jesse, which would seem to mean that he's an ancestor to Jesse, the father of David. But of course, all this happens in the last days, so he can't really be a root to Jesse in that way. Gileadi translates this word as a sprig, meaning a young branch. As mentioned in the last video, this branch is actually a graft brought in to complete the work that the rod, or Joseph Smith, could not finish, which is the establishing of God's people in Zion. Isaiah says this man will be an ensign to whom the Gentiles shall seek, and when they come to him, his rest in Zion shall be glorious. In fact, we're told that Zion will be overshadowed by a flaming fire by night and a cloud and smoke by day. And as Christ too shall make his abode there, his rest will also be glorious. At this point in the timeline, evil will still exist in the world, but God's servants will range throughout the earth, even going to Assyria, the main source of the Assyrian king's wicked army, and find the penitent who will come to Christ. In the Doctrine and Covenants, we read, Question: What are we to understand by sealing the 144,000 out of all the tribes of Israel, 12,000 out of every tribe? Answer: We are to understand that those who are sealed are high priests, ordained into the holy order of God to administer the everlasting gospel. For they are they who are ordained out of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people by the angels, to whom is given power over the nations of the earth, to bring as many will come to the church of the firstborn. This gathering will be a worldwide gathering from all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people, making everything previous to that appear to be just a commencement of the work. And when these people travel to Zion and redeem Jerusalem, the Father himself will go before them and behind them, as Christ himself said. Isaiah goes on to tell us that there will be no more envy or enmity between the tribes of Israel. Rather, Jews and Ephraimites will work together in perfect harmony, along with the other tribes, to establish Zion in the New Jerusalem and to rebuild Old Jerusalem. At that point in the timeline, they will fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines who are left in the land. In other words, the righteous people in Zion, endowed with power, will easily put down all threats from the remaining wicked around them. At that time, Isaiah says that the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea. The Egyptian sea is the Red Sea, which Moses once parted by faith. The tongue is the Gulf, or that part of the Red Sea that the tribes of Israel walk through on dry ground. In the last days, this will happen again. However, the entire Gulf, it appears, will be dried up to allow passage for the righteous to return to the lands of their inheritance. As Isaiah says, there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people. This highway will be raised up and smoothed out, a highway that only the righteous can walk on. It will be called the way of holiness. At this time, the Lord will perform many miracles through his servant, the branch, and the many righteous souls who serve with him. All of this is explained in greater detail in the book, The Words of Isaiah. I'm Curtis Taylor with The Words of Isaiah.